Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, November the 20th, 2024. Happy birthday, Joe Biden. Yes, it's Joe Biden's 82nd birthday, and to celebrate, we're going to look at his chart in this video. Of course, I'm first going to be looking at the astrology and the I Ching for today, for all of us. So the section looking at Joe Biden's chart is going to come at the end of this video. And I think it's important to look at Joe Biden's chart because you could argue that this last 2 months of the Biden regime before he hands over to Trump on January the 20th is the most dangerous. It's dangerous because it's a lame duck. They're going out of the door, yet they want to keep something going. They want to keep the war in Ukraine going. They want to do everything they can to support Ukraine. And Trump and his new team want to do things differently. And so Biden in his last 2 months want to make things as difficult as possible for Trump. And it's not really just about the Ukraine. It's just about spiting the future regime. And so I think it's a good idea to look at this astrologically and to see what is happening. And it is dangerous because Ukraine is losing. I mean, there's no doubt it's losing. And of course, it was the mainstream media that was telling us that the Ukrainians weren't losing, that they were taking Ukrainian data and accounts at face value. It's that same mainstream media that was telling us that Kamala Harris was going to win the election. So now it's all unfolding. And so you could say that this regime, the Biden regime, is kind of, I suppose it's a bit like a cornered rat. It's finished, but it's still got 2 months. It's still got 2 months left. It still has control. Likewise, Ukraine is at its most dangerous because it is losing. So you've got a lame duck regime supporting a losing government, a losing war effort in Ukraine. So this is really dangerous. So I do want to consider what is happening in Biden's chart and also to an extent the USA's chart in terms of these last couple of months. I'm not going to go into huge detail because I'll be doing probably more videos on this topic. Anyway, before I get into Joe Biden's horoscope and the Ukraine, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today. So just a reminder, if you happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indeed like it by pressing the like button. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be really grateful if you were to subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything, but it does make a big difference to the channel. Anyway, here is the chart for today, which is Wednesday, November the 20th. I feel quite familiar with November the 20th. My mother was born on November the 20th, and my sister, she was born on November the 20th as well. And my brother, he was also born on November the 20th. My father was not born on November the 20th. He was born on November the 17th. Anyway, so let's look at what's happening today. Of course, my brother and sister will not be watching this video, I don't think. But if they are, I would like to wish them a happy birthday. And also happy birthday to my mother, wherever she is. She died in 2017. Anyway, let's look at what's happening today. So on November the 20th, we have the moon just moving into Leo, at least from a New York perspective. In fact, the moon moves into Leo at, just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, London time. So the moon's position does depend a little bit on your time zone. So, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon moves into Leo this evening. It's pretty much a moon in Cancer day. If you're in Europe or Africa, Then first half of the day, moon in Cancer. Last half of the day, moon in Leo. With the Americas, well, that's most of the day. Moon is in Leo, so we are thinking about this transition and this changeover, and so we move from moon in Cancer, which is sort of an emotionally vibrant sign, a sort of a feminine, receptive sign, into Leo. And so Leo is a very different sign. It's a fire sign. And so over the course of the day, we might experience some change. And in terms of there being more spark, more energy, because, you know, we have Mercury and Mars already in fire signs, Mercury in Sagittarius, Mars in Leo, but then Moon moves into Leo, and it sort of joins Mars in that sign. So that is kind of a process. Now, there is action taking place while the moon is in late Cancer. So what's happening late Cancer is that the moon is making a trine to Neptune and making a trine to the Sun. So in fact, we've got a grand trine in water signs, and in many respects, it's quite a pleasant grand trine. It's nice to have a trine between the Sun and the Moon, and also when we involve Neptune, there's just an easy receptiveness to it. So I think we're going to feel balanced and sensitive today, especially if you're in Europe. I think that if Europe and Asia, Australasia, if you're in the Americas, that grand trine might be sort of more a feature of the really sort of the beginning of the day. But still, I mean, even with Moon in Leo is still making a trine to Neptune in Pisces, still making a trine to the Sun in Scorpio, but it's a sort of dissociate trine. So it's perhaps not so strong as when the moon is in late Cancer rather than early Leo. So there is a certain sort of easiness there, and we can pick things up emotionally relatively easily. And so I think most of us should be fairly receptive over the course of the day. Now, as far as non-lunar aspects are concerned, I suppose the main thing going on is a sesquiquadrate between Venus and Uranus. So you can see that Venus is at 11 Capricorn, Uranus is at sort of 25 Taurus. So today we do get this feel of Venus and Uranus sort of clashing with each other. 135 degrees, that is 3/8 of the circle. It's a dynamic aspect. And so with Venus aspecting Uranus, we might feel a certain unease in the presence of certain people. We can't expect to get on with everyone, and some people might just be disturbing, and that just might be the way it is. Or in terms of relationships, there might be sudden changes, things happen that we hadn't entirely expected. So relationships may not be entirely smooth, but I don't think it's too dramatic, this Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus. I mean, it's a fairly fast-moving aspect, so I think that in many cases we're just not going to really feel it. So as far as the heliocentric picture is concerned, let's just have a look at things from the viewpoint of the Sun. So we'll put the Sun at the center of the solar system, and so there is the Earth at 28 Taurus. Remember, Sun is in the middle. So the Earth at 28 Taurus, 29 Taurus, is making a sextile to Neptune at 29 Pisces. So Earth sextile Neptune, heliocentrically, it sort of supports what I was saying about the grand trine. So grand trine, we've got the Sun in geocentrically, we've got the Sun and the Moon trining Neptune. We also have Earth sextile Neptune. And so that does indicate an overall sense of being aware of what is happening, having a certain sensitivity, being able to perhaps read people's thoughts and feelings. And, you know, also Earth sextile Neptune with a sextile. Sextile does have implications of effort, but not too much effort. So that could be supportive of artistic endeavours. But we must try not to take things too seriously or be too grim about things, because heliocentrically we have a conjunction between Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury is a fast mover. Heliocentrically it moves, I think, on average, well, on average it depends. It does depend where it is in the cycle, but it moves. So I don't think it's useful to talk about an average movement, but it does take only 88 days to go around the Sun. So it does move quickly. But at the moment it is conjunct Saturn. So there may be a certain temptation, or at least a tendency, to take things a little bit too seriously. Certain things might seem a bit grim, though, I mean, it's important to be realistic with Mercury conjunct Saturn, but we just don't want to be too realistic. We just have to consider the possibility that, you know, maybe we're exaggerating a little. And in fact, Mercury, if you look at this chart, we've actually got a conjunction, a wider conjunction. Venus is moving to a conjunction of Saturn. Mercury is separating from a conjunction of Saturn. So with Venus moving to a conjunction of Saturn, that may say something about relationships. And I did say that geocentrically we have Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, which may make certain relationships a little bit difficult. And then we've got Venus conjunct Saturn, which is perhaps a little bit cold. It may be difficult to get close to people, at least on an emotional level, even though geocentrically we do have this grand trine in water signs. So I think many of us are going to be sensitive, but we're perhaps also going to be somewhat wary, because we can see the differences between ourselves and other people. Anyway, those are some thoughts on the heliocentric picture. And now I want to transition to the 12 signs and do my forecast for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, November the 20th. So these are my forecasts for today. Aries. Aries, there is a bit of a change going on, and the reason we have this change is because the moon is moving from Cancer into Leo, and it's a change that is really going to take place over the course of the day, and it's going to be somewhat dependent on location. So if you're in the Americas, then this morning the moon moves into Leo. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then this evening the moon moves into Leo. So it does somewhat depend. And by the way, if you're in Australia or New Zealand and you're listening to this, I've just realised I forgot to put up the chart for what the planets look like in Australia. I will be putting that up towards the end of a video after I've done the I Ching. In fact, probably before I've done the I Ching. Sorry, Aries, to interrupt. Okay, so the moon is moving. The moon is changing signs. So it may be that at the beginning of the day, you are feeling that you do value your security, that you don't want to take risks. You want to be comfortable. And then as the moon moves into Leo, things change. You do become, I think, more of an extrovert, and I think that you become also sort of more confident. And when the moon moves into Leo, it straight away starts making a conjunction to Mars. So as the day progresses, your energy levels start to increase, and you really start to feel that you want things to happen, and perhaps that you want to make things happen. And perhaps over the last couple of days, there have been things that you've been holding back on, you've been storing them, and now you want to reveal them, and you want to show the world, what a wonderful creative person you are. And I think you can do that very well. So there's going to be no misunderstandings about who you are and what you want, and so that should be something to look forward to. Though in terms of relationships, we shouldn't forget that Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. So relationships may be a little tense. It may be that some people are just don't see eye to eye with you, and you may be a little bit concerned by their behavior. You may regard some people as being unreliable, or they do things you weren't expecting, and so from your perspective there may be a little bit of irritation. On the other hand, the moon is moving into Leo, and Leo is, it's a nice sign from an Aries perspective. It's a sign from an Aries perspective, which is often connected with romance and easygoing relationships. So I think relationships can work, provided it's all very straightforward. There's no agenda. It's all about living for the moment and having fun for the moment. It's just if you start to get sort of too intense or too emotional, then things might not work out. Remembering also that the moon is starting to apply to a conjunction of Mars. And so with the moon starting to apply to a conjunction of Mars, there is a possibility of just irritation. If people behave the wrong way, you might get annoyed. You might sort of notice something and you feel you absolutely have to point it out, because the moon is not just moving to a conjunction of Mars, it's actually making an opposition to Pluto. So Mars and Pluto are in opposition to one another at the moment, because you've got Mars in Scorpio, Pluto in Aquarius, but the moon is bringing all of that together. So relationships can be fine, but they need to be treated carefully. It's okay provided you're enjoying yourself, provided you're not serious, provided there's no agenda, but as soon as you get too deep, too emotional, too intense, then I think there's a danger that things could go wrong. Taurus, we have a slow sign change, the moon moving out of Cancer into Taurus. With the moon moving out of Cancer into Leo. And so with that sign change, many Taurians are possibly going to feel a little more introspective. You're going to, I think, feel that you've done your bit, you've tried your hardest, but now is not a time where you really want to assert yourself, at least not in a public sense. So I think that you are going to start to value your privacy over the course of the day, and this is particularly the case in the Americas, because the moon moves into Leo this morning, and so pretty early in the day you feel that pull downwards into somewhere where you feel comfortable, where you feel secure, and you just don't want to be pressurized. But there might still be pressure, because the moon, when it moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto, and then of course it makes a conjunction to Mars. And so however hard you try to shut off the rest of the world, you can still feel its influence. and you can feel the pressure. And I suppose you're reminded now that Pluto has changed sign. Pluto is now in Aquarius. I mean, it may take a long time for you to actually recognize that Pluto is in Aquarius, but with the moon making an opposition to Mars and Pluto really Mars opposition Pluto, there's a sense in which you feel pressure from the outside. Now that pressure may not actually directly manifest itself. You might not get a message saying you've got to do something right now, you've got to be somewhere by a particular time or a particular date. You may not get that direct pressure, but I think, Taurus, you're going to feel that pressure is beginning. It won't be long before those demands come in, before you start to really feel Pluto in Aquarius. And it just may be with Pluto and Mars opposition Pluto, with Moon and Mars opposition Pluto, today might be the first day when you really start to feel the fact that Pluto has made this sign change. Now, in terms of how you come across, in some ways you may come over as actually being a relatively difficult person. And the reason for that, Taurus, is that Venus, which is your ruler, is sesquiquadrate Uranus. So Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, you want to do things your way, and you're perhaps quite focused on your own individuality, and you don't really want to do things other people's way. So that might actually be a good reason not to get too close to anyone, especially if they don't know you, they don't understand your quirks. If you get too close to them, there may be something about you that is a little bit off-putting. I mean, I suppose it could work the other way. You might be put off by what other people are doing. That's certainly possible. But it's not a day for really revealing who you are to people who don't know. Because if people were to find out who you are, what you like, what you don't like, they might not appreciate it. And that means that you can be an individual by all means, but be an individual on your own terms in a situation where no one's going to get freaked out. And that way everyone's happy. But what's most important is that you are happy. Though I don't want to completely suggest that you should cut yourself off, because you can actually be quite persuasive. It's not going to be easy to be persuasive, because if you show people who you are, what you're really like, they might not fully appreciate it, they might not understand. But if you're incredibly subtle, and you have to be very subtle, and sometimes Taurians are not very good at being subtle, but if you can be incredibly subtle and really listen to your feelings, maybe you can listen to your feelings at the moment. We do have a grand trine in water signs. The sun and the moon are in trine, they're in trine to Neptune. Then you can perhaps start to sort of understand what makes people tick, and then you can start to work out how best to communicate with them, and perhaps how best to be persuasive. So it's going to require some work, but if need be, you can slowly but surely persuade people to do things your way, and perhaps to think things your way. And that's more important maybe than doing things your way. If you can get people to think things your way, then you'll have quite a large element of control. Gemini, it's a day when you feel that something is changing. We have the moon moving from Cancer to Leo, And with the moon moving in Cancer, moon in Cancer for Geminis, I mean, from a Gemini perspective, moon in Cancer, it's probably not the best place for the moon to be, even though the moon is in its own sign in Cancer. But it just may be a little bit boring for you. I mean, not for anyone else, but just for you. It might be boring. It might be about having to deal with things that you don't really want to have to deal with. You don't really want to have to spend, for example, a long time having to worry about money and making sure everything is in order financially. I mean, you have to sometimes, but that might be one element of moon in Cancer. And it can be about having to really think about what you own, what you don't own. Do you want more things? Do you have enough money? These are the kind of issues you might have to face while the moon is in Cancer. But then the moon moves into Leo, and I think that this is, in some respects, more exciting. There's more going on. Leo is a sign which has a certain sympathy with Gemini. It's very often that two signs that are, when they're sort of one sign apart, when you've got Gemini and Leo, with Cancer in the middle, they often have a sympathy. And so moon moving into Leo, I think you're going to feel more comfortable, more at home, and better able to sort of tell the world who you are and what you want, and you're going to feel sort of more dynamic because when the moon moves into Leo, it makes a conjunction to Mars. But when the moon moves into Leo, it also makes an opposition to Pluto. And so in terms of what you're thinking and what you're talking about, it may be that you feel that you're dealing with some really quite important concepts which maybe you're only just starting to understand. But if you then try to communicate these concepts, tell people about your ideas, it may be difficult to make an impression. And the reason might be you simply don't know enough about what you're trying to talk about. So in terms of conversation, try not to make things too complicated. And if you're talking to people about important things, so for example, if you had an interview, then with moon opposition Pluto and moon moving to the conjunction of Mars to a lesser extent, it might be that you're asked questions and you try to come over as being very knowledgeable, but it just doesn't work. So be careful in terms of what you talk about. It's just very easy to go too far and to take on a subject that right now you're not particularly familiar with. You think you're familiar with it, but actually when you start talking about it, you realize you're not. And it's going to take time. So if you've just realized something, or you're just starting to understand something, don't feel you're in a position to be an authority about it. I mean, you will, I think, at some stage be an authority, but maybe not right now. And you therefore need to stick to things which you really understand. And that is certainly something you can do. So perhaps ask yourself what you're good at, what you know about. Ask yourself, what areas do you feel that you really are an authority? And be honest about it. Don't pretend to have an authority you don't have. But if you stick to that, stick to your knowledge, stick to your experience, stick to the things that you're good at and understand, then you'll be fine. It might seem that you're limiting yourself, but right now I think that's probably a good idea. Cancer. Cancer, the moon is changing sign. So moon moving from Cancer to Leo. So for many Cancerians, it might be a day of two halves, and quite where that day splits does rather depend on your time zone. So if you're an American Cancerian, then maybe you don't have to worry so much about that split, because the moon moves into Leo fairly early in the day. It moves in sort of when does that move in? Sort of, I don't know, 10 to 9 in the morning in New York, even earlier if you're on the West Coast. So if you're an American Cancerian, it's not such an issue unless you're up really early in the morning. But if you're in Europe, first part of the day up until maybe early afternoon, you're going to find that the moon is in Cancer. Then last half, well, not just last half, maybe even only the last third, perhaps. The moon is in Leo, and of course, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon doesn't move into Leo until this evening. So it does all depend. And so, assuming you're in the Americas, the moon moving into Leo, it's a day when you perhaps don't have quite so much power as you used to have. You're not quite so familiar with what is happening, and there may be a certain amount of uncertainty. And because you feel a little bit of uncertainty, that might mean that you have to sort of overreact, because the moon moving into Leo is making an opposition to Pluto. Remember, Pluto has now gone into Aquarius, and so with the moon opposition Pluto, and the moon starting making a conjunction to Mars, you may feel that you have to take steps to tell everyone that you're okay, that you understand things, and maybe you don't want to seem weak. That may be part of it, and that actually might be why you get annoyed. There could be an annoyance here with the moon making conjunction to Mars, because you feel you have to assert yourself. Now, there may be other reasons why you get annoyed. Anything to do with money could be problematic. Once things start drifting to the financial arena, once people start talking about money, that's when the clashes start. I mean, money is a real problem. And so if you want money, if someone else wants money, there are arguments about what should be done with money, then these arguments may be very difficult to resolve. And actually, it may reach a point where money becomes a surrogate for something else. It might seem to be about money, but in fact, it's just about a broader power struggle. And money is a way to control. It's a way for you to control others. It's a way for others to control you. It depends. So money does matter. And Cancer, it may be that you have to take action to defend your own financial interests, especially if you're in the Americas. Now, if you are a Cancerian in Europe, and particularly Australia, New Zealand, it's a somewhat different day. The moon doesn't really move into Leo until sort of later in the day, maybe not even until tomorrow. You're going to perhaps be aware of a grand trine in water signs. So this grand trine in water signs, it's pleasant, because you've got the moon trine the sun, and moon late Cancer trine sun in Scorpio. It does make you feel that you're in tune with things, and it's also, the moon is trine Neptune, and the sun, and the sun is sort of trine Neptune. So if you're not in the Americas, there is a certain ease there. Things are moving, and emotionally you kind of understand what's going on, and perhaps you don't have to try too hard. I mean, even when the moon moves into Leo, so if you're in the Americas, particularly moon moving into Leo, the moon might move into Leo, but it is still trine the sun. It's still trine Neptune. So the moon in Leo is still able to inform itself through sort of emotional means. And so however much you want to assert yourself with the moon in Leo, starting to make that conjunction to Mars, I think your feelings are going to still be able to guide you. And they may have a moderating impact on you. So you don't have to get too annoyed. You don't have to go out of your way to assert yourself. You just have to understand what's going on, understand people's motives, and in that way things should be okay and things should run smoothly. And even moon in Leo, I think there are certainly advantages of the moon being in Leo whenever that happens, whether it's this morning, whether it's this evening, because you have a sense of who you are, and you also have a pretty good ability to protect yourself because the moon is making a conjunction to Mars. But just try not to make a scene. Moon Mars can be very angry, and you don't want to show your anger. I mean, the real power and force of your anger, unless it's really necessary. Still, if you do decide to explode, perhaps because just the pressure is too much, because you may feel that you've just been pushed too hard. If you do try to explode, if you happen to, I'm not saying you should explode, but if that happens, you're certainly going to make a big impact. And it may, in a few situations, be a good way of creating change and transformation, remembering that moon is opposition Pluto. You show your feelings, you show your anger, and that might change everything. Leo, you are in touch with lots of things. You are aware of things which normally you don't really understand. Maybe they're things you perceive in dreams, but right now there are a lot of things you get. And if you're honest with yourself, Leo, you can really see the way things are going. And this is perhaps a reminder that Leo is a fire sign. It therefore is very intuitive. Intuition is a word one associates with the fire signs, and intuition is just about making connections. Things suddenly make sense. It doesn't happen in a slow way. It just happens, just like that, and you just know what's going to happen, and you just get a feeling of certainty. And I think that for you at the moment, there is this growing sense of certainty that things are moving in a particular way. And I'm thinking, in particular about the world and what's happening on planet Earth. You just know how it's all going to unfold, and this is perhaps intensified by the fact that the moon is moving into your sign. So over the course of the day, moon moves out of Cancer into Leo. It may happen in the morning if you're in the Americas. It may happen in the evening if you're in Australia or New Zealand. I think maybe even New Zealand might be early tomorrow morning. But you have a sense of things. And also you have a sense that you are moving into a situation where you have greater control, because the moon is moving towards a conjunction of Mars, and Mars is in Leo. Mars is in mutual reception with the Sun. So I don't think, Leo, you will have any problems looking after yourself and defending your own interests. But at the same time, you are starting to become aware of outside pressures, and some of that has to do with the fact that Pluto is now in Aquarius. And so Pluto's in Aquarius, Pluto's in your opposite sign, and the moon is starting to make an opposition to Pluto. In fact, Mars is opposition to Pluto. So however hard you try to assert yourself, you are aware that you are dealing with powerful people and powerful situations. But you have to ask yourself also, how powerful are they? You don't want to imagine things. You don't want to pretend that someone is more powerful, more significant than they actually are. So, be realistic and don't assume that, that in certain areas you don't have any power because someone else is in control. That would be quite unnecessary, especially now with the moon moving into Leo. And I think that, you just benefit by the fact that you just understand where it's going, and you're able to really demonstrate this understanding, and you're also helped by the fact that the moon is making a trine to the sun. Now that trine to the sun starts in Cancer. So the beginning of the day, the moon is in Cancer, and it's making a trine to the sun. Then it moves into Leo. But even in Leo, the moon is trine the sun. And so with the moon trine sun, there's just a certain sense of flow, that things are moving, and that you therefore are able to respond quite easily. And if there's anything today that you do feel that you need to express, and if you feel you need to get your way, then I'm confident that you can be successful. And don't assume, as perhaps I've already suggested, don't assume that anyone can stop you. I think you do seem to believe that some people can stop you, that there are certain situations that are insurmountable. But I don't think that's the case. And just a reminder: the Sun is in mutual reception to Mars. The Sun is not going to stay in mutual reception to Mars for very long. The Sun is, the Sun in just over 24 hours is going to leave Scorpio and move into Sagittarius. The moment that happens, the Sun is no longer in mutual reception to Mars. So if there's something you have been meaning to do, then maybe you should do it sooner rather than later. Particularly something which requires a certain amount of presence and strength. I mean, by strength, I don't mean physical strength. I'm talking about the strength of your personality. So if there's something you could do today, then I would suggest you do it today. Because if you wait until the weekend, the Sun will be in Sagittarius, and you just may not be in such a strong position. So I think that you really may have to sort of make hay while the sun shines. Virgo, you don't have to do everything at once. You don't. Some things can be put on hold. It just may not be that it's the right time. I mean, I know that you want everything to be complete, and maybe you've made promises, maybe you've overpromised, but in that situation, you can't do everything, and maybe you should have an understanding of your own limitations. And if you understand your limits, then you can decide which things matter and put everything else on hold. And I don't think that you're really going to want to be the center of attention. And this is going to be the case, as the day progresses. You're going to really want to withdraw from things, because it's just too much effort and you're just not going to be in the mood. Plus, you may feel that you're better able to do things, on your own terms, in your own way. And so that is certainly the simple approach, the way to just feel easier about things. And I think there are actually certain things that you might have to contemplate and work out in your own way, because today the moon moves into Leo, and it makes an opposition to Pluto, and then it makes a conjunction to Mars. And so you may just be aware that certain things are a little bit heavy. And if you're surrounded by people, if you're having to deal with other people's demands, you're not going to be in the mood, and I don't think that you're going to be particularly effective. And it may also be the case that you reach the conclusion that something is being done wrong. And there were things that you didn't understand until very recently, but now it's suddenly becoming clear. You have a clear sense of what can be done, what can't be done. And you might also have a clear sense of the legality of a situation. I mean, not like breaking a law in a criminal sense, but laws can influence our lives in many different ways, and government edicts, what governments allow, what governments don't allow. Okay, not necessarily just governments, but I don't know, it depends on the situation. Local authorities, councils, municipalities. You do get a sense of this, if appropriate, and it suddenly becomes clear where it wasn't clear before. And having understood all that, that requires some thought, because you want to do things, I suppose, by the book, and the book is suddenly very clear. And so, Virgo, I think you're going to want to do things properly, and if you are forced to be with other people, I think you're going to expect them to do things properly. And I suppose in certain situations you can force people to see the truth of the situation, not a spiritual truth, sort of more of a legal truth. So that might be one thing you could do, just explaining to someone that they can't do something. I mean, they might not want to hear it, but if you think that you've understood the law, then you probably understood it right. And other people may be in blissful ignorance. They may think they can get away with anything. They may not think it's breaking the law, but actually it might be, and you might be the one to tell them, although in the first instance you perhaps won't get any thanks. Libra, you're actually quite persuasive at the moment. You have a certain way with words. You can say things that people will understand, people will listen to you, and if you're trying to change someone's mind about something, now might actually be a very good time to do it. So you think that there's no way that someone will come round to your way of thinking, but don't give up. And so today, if you make your point one more time, you may be actually quite surprised by how successful you are. And in terms of what's happening today, it is relatively high profile. The moon starts the day in Cancer, ends the day in Leo. Both Cancer and Leo, from a Virgo perspective, are pretty high profile signs. They are about you getting noticed. And the moon in the end makes a conjunction to Mars in Leo, or it starts moving towards a conjunction to Mars. And with that conjunction in Mars, Libra, you may feel that it's time to do something, time to perhaps push your message. And remember, you're very good at pushing your message at the moment. And so you can get people to listen, and you can surprise people as well. After all, Venus, which is your ruler, is sesquiquadrate Uranus. Uranus is the planet of a big change, can be the planet of earthquakes. So with Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, we might get the image of you being perhaps quite accommodating and friendly, and you not rocking the boat, and then suddenly you burst into life, and you show people who you are, and it's a bit of a surprise. And because you have that element of surprise, you can actually get your way very quickly. So there's no reason, Libra, to be taken advantage of. There's no reason why you have to, follow the crowd. It's all completely unnecessary. It can all happen on your terms. And with the moon conjunct Mars, there can be, I suppose, vibrant discussion if need be. Not everyone's going to agree. There are going to be disagreements, but I think you can handle it. And it may be that there is an important issue which needs to be thrashed out today. Might be relating to work or business. It could be, or it could be about, it's just something you're trying to achieve, and hasn't been entirely easy. But now is the time to really start to focus on it and to have a healthy and honest discussion. And it might be that it borders on the argumentative. But there's nothing wrong with an argument. Sometimes an argument has to happen, but an argument can just help sort of move things along. And I think that is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty healthy. Scorpio, you want to be noticed, or at least you should want to be noticed. You can be noticed. I think that it's becoming clear that you have something to offer, and the time for holding back or for sort of thinking things through is pretty much over. And so think about what you want to happen, and think about your ambitions. Not just sort of long-term ambitions, but what, for example, you'd like to happen for the rest of the week. And if you are decisive about it, and absolutely clear about what you want, I think that people will listen. And don't be afraid of causing a fuss. Sometimes that's a risk you have to take, but if you are dynamic and clear, I think people will just accept that you know what you're doing. They probably also accept that you're in the right. And so, Scorpio, it's just quite important that you don't hold back and you don't worry too much about the impact you're having. I actually think, Scorpio, that you can be quite sort of pleasant. You can be pleasant but assertive at the same time. You can pay some attention to people's needs and people's sensibilities, and you can give the impression that you're acting in their interests, but all the while you're thinking about your own interests. And so with that sense of purpose, Scorpio, I'm confident that it's a day when you can actually achieve quite a lot. And the moon is starting to make an opposition to Pluto. Okay, quite when that opposition to Pluto is does depend a little bit on your time zone, but this moon opposition Pluto for you, I think, is quite motivating. And Pluto may represent your inner power, the power that comes from the depths, and that's perhaps been a particular focus over the last, 24 hours, or ever since Pluto moved into Aquarius. And so in terms of how you express it, it's like publicly you assert yourself, and in the process you can draw down and bring to the surface your inner resources and your inner power. And I think that moon opposition Pluto could actually be something that works in your favor. It might feel a bit dramatic, but I don't think there's anything wrong with drama. Remember, Scorpio, Mars is moving through Leo. It's a dramatic placement for Mars. Also, Mars is in mutual reception to the Sun, and you've got the Sun in, the Sun is in Scorpio, but that mutual reception between the Sun and Sun and Mars is not going to last forever. It's nearly over. So the Sun is on the verge of moving into Sagittarius. Let me just remind you about when the Sun moves into Sagittarius. The Sun moves into Sagittarius tomorrow, maybe the day after. So London time, it moves into Sagittarius tomorrow just before 8 in the evening. It's going to be early afternoon, or sometime in the afternoon in the Americas. So yeah, tomorrow, maybe the day after, if you're in Asia or Australia or New Zealand, but Sun moves out of Scorpio, and in some respects, that's going to make you less powerful. And so, if there's something, Scorpio, that you feel absolutely has to be done, particularly if it's something that requires assertion, then maybe today's the day to do it. Okay, you might be able to do it tomorrow. I mean, okay, you're still going to be able to do it, I think, but you might as well act now while you've got the power and while you've got the strength. It's not a time for delay. I know you might sort of regard the whole thing as being a little bit heavy, perhaps, but things maybe aren't going to get any better. And just the reminder that Mars, your ruler, is slowing down. The longer you leave things, the longer it's going to take. And at a certain stage, Mars will, of course, go retrograde on December the 6th. I'm actually going to be talking about that Mars retrograde a bit later in this video. So don't procrastinate, Scorpio. Time may be of the essence. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, the moon is moving into Leo over the course of the day. And I think that from your perspective, that's something to welcome. You're going to feel more that there are more possibilities. Last couple of days when the moon's been in Cancer, Sagittarius, you might have felt that you weren't really yourself, that you had to perhaps be sort of more introverted than you wanted to be. There were just things to work out, maybe stuff of an emotional nature you had to work out. You just weren't ready to really interact with the world. But now with the moon moving into Leo, things are changing. I think that you're becoming more optimistic and more dynamic, because the moon moves into Leo, it makes a conjunction to Mars, and this might be a time where Sagittarians feel that they can do some exploring. Exploring can take place on many levels. It can be exploration of the mind, it can be the exploration of concepts, it can be spiritual exploration. You don't have to, go to the rainforest to do exploring, wherever those rainforests are. And so don't limit yourself. You've understood certain complexities that you had to go through. You understand how complicated life is. I mean, we all need to understand how complicated life is, but I suppose having understood those complications, you're perhaps able to go further afield now as the moon moves into Leo, as it makes that conjunction to Mars. And I think that in many respects, people are going to appreciate you. It'll feel that you have something new and interesting to offer. And so that's something you need to consider. It's not perhaps a time to hold back, though we should be looking at the sun. The sun is at noon New York, is at 28:52 Scorpio. In other words, in just over 24 hours, the sun will move into Sagittarius. And so sun moving into Sagittarius is going to give you sort of even more power. It's going to give you a greater sense of yourself. The Sagittarian season, I mean, it's kind of started already. We've already had Venus moving through Sagittarius. Okay, it's out now. It's in Capricorn. We've got Mercury in Sagittarius, and now the Sun is on the verge of moving into Sagittarius. And tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, depending on where you are, it will be there. And of course, if you're looking at these horoscopes from the perspective of your sun sign, that of course means that your birthday season is about to unfold. So things are looking up, and it's just important, Sagittarius, that you don't limit yourself, and that applies also to other people. Part of discovering the possibilities around you it's about interaction, and it's about seeing what other people have to offer, because there are people who are around you at the moment who have actually a great deal to offer. I mean, you may not always agree with them. I mean, indeed, over some matters you might fervently disagree with them, but they've still got something to offer. In fact, you could say, Sagittarius, the people who have most to offer you are the people who you have least in common with, at least on the surface. You know, people who are just like you, who have the same priorities as you, perhaps the same background as you, they believe in the same things. How useful are they really going to be? It's just going to be an echo chamber. But if you actually seek out people who are pleasant and good-natured, by all means, but who are also very different from you, have different views, different perspectives, then I think that those are the kind of people you should be looking for, because I think that you can really benefit from them enormously. Capricorn, you are a little bit uncertain at the moment. You don't feel that you're really in tune with things. I mean, it's passing, but some of your ideas and the way you're thinking today may just be a little bit sluggish. You don't really feel that you can understand things as you'd like them to, and you may find that you're thinking about things that you thought about yesterday. You may feel that there's almost a little bit of obsession going on, and it is actually possible that you are limiting yourself. You perhaps are more interested in yesterday's ideas than tomorrow's ideas, and so that can make you, I think, perhaps quite difficult to persuade. You've got all sorts of reasons why something can't happen. They might sound very good reasons, but those reasons sort of might be specious. They sound good on the surface, but are they real? So if you do find yourself disagreeing with someone or coming up with reasons why something can't happen, then it is possible that you're being overcautious, and you may actually be limiting yourself. And also at the same time, I know you might you might think that you're being realistic and down to earth. You may actually not be being realistic and down to earth at all. You might actually have a fundamental misunderstanding of the way things are, and you're jumping to the wrong conclusions. And very often those conclusions are going to perhaps be negative, thinking this can't happen. And there might be a sense in which you're kidding yourself. But you're kidding yourself in perhaps an overly negative kind of way. You're kidding yourself that things are more difficult than they actually are. And why are you doing that? Because I think that you are at the moment quite resistant to change. And it's not serious. It's very much something that is passing. Remember, these are daily forecasts. I'm not talking about tomorrow, and they are just forecasts. And I'm trying to look at things from a perspective of, all things being equal. So perhaps, Capricorn, you shouldn't think too much today. It's always good to think, but perhaps you should just focus on your strengths. Focus on the fact that Venus is moving through your sign. Intrinsically, with Venus moving through your sign, you are a friendly person. You come over as being sensible, and people are going to like you. And it's true that Venus is sesquiquadrate Uranus, but don't allow that Venus-Uranus sesquiquadrate to spoil things. You see, that Venus-Uranus sesquiquadrate, which is exact today, could just encourage you to just respond to people in a way that is perhaps a little bit negative, maybe a bit shocking, or shockingly negative. That is possible. And just consider your motives, because your motives may not be particularly good. It just may be that you're, for some reason, just a little bit stuck in the past. I mean, there's nothing wrong with thinking about the past. I mean, Capricorn can be a very past-orientated sign. But it's just that right now, at the moment, you may not quite be yourself. And it's quite possible that you're still getting used to the fact that Pluto has changed sign. You had Pluto in Aquarius for such a long time. I mean, okay, on and off Pluto in Capricorn. You had Pluto in Capricorn on and off for a long time, since, I don't know, 2007 or 2008 or whenever. And you got used to it. And you got used to perhaps some of the control that Pluto in Capricorn brought. And now the moon is in Aquarius. Things have changed. Something that was having an influence on you has now gone. And perhaps you're just trying to reconfigure the system. And, that's what's going on. But, don't worry, Capricorn. Whatever I'm talking about, it is just a passing phase. Aquarius. You may feel as the day progresses that you do have to take into account what other people are doing. People are doing things that you may not understand or you may not be comfortable with. And, we do have a build-up to the moon making an opposition to Pluto, and then the moon having made that opposition to Pluto, it starts making a conjunction to Mars. And so, as the moon moves out of Cancer into Leo, you may feel that you're not fully in control, perhaps, that you have to do things maybe other people's way, but that's not something you want to do. And so, Aquarius, you might become quite wary of the people in your life and not quite sure how to respond to them. And of course, Pluto is now in Aquarius. It's at noon today, New York time. Pluto is at 0 degrees 1 minute Aquarius. It's there, and it's not going away anytime soon. It's not going away until, I think, March 2043. So with Pluto in Aquarius, you kind of feel that you should be in control. That's the way it should be. You haven't fully worked it out, but it should be you calling the shots. And that's that's the first way you see Pluto in Aquarius. But there are many different ways of seeing Pluto in Aquarius. And, with Pluto in Aquarius, there are perhaps going to have to be things you're going to have to change about yourself and the way you come over, the way you present yourself. And just right now, with the moon and Mars moving into Leo, opposition Pluto, it may just feel that there's a new challenge, that you can't do everything what you want to do, what you want, because there are these things to deal with. And perhaps what's happened is that your defense shields need to be reconfigured. It may be a bit like Russia. Sorry about this analogy, but it's the analogy that comes to mind. So, if you've been watching the Ukraine war, since 2022, what happens is that the West provides Ukraine with some new weapon, ATACMS or HIMARS or storm shadows, and Ukraine starts using these weapons, and to begin with devastating effect. And then it takes Russia a long time to work it out, and Russia has to work out the electronics of the situation and how best to defend itself. And then after a few months, Russia works it out, and these weapons start to become increasingly ineffective. And so maybe this is a bit like what's happening at the moment. Things have changed. Pluto has gone into Aquarius, and with Pluto going into Aquarius, you're aware of your vulnerabilities, and it just may feel that the world out there has got new ways to exploit your vulnerabilities. And it's just going to take you a bit of time to work it out, work out how best to defend yourself, because it is a time, I think, Aquarius, where your defenses are being reconfigured, and it's something very, very fortunate. It's something to be welcomed, but your defenses, it's not that you're defending yourself against anything that is directly hostile. It's just that the world has an influence on you. People have an influence on you, and the world is changing. The way the world affects you is changing. So that means you're going to have to change who you are. I mean, not change deep down who you are. I'm talking about how you present yourself and how you fend off, various threats, and making sure that sort of on an emotional level, I don't know, your aura and everything is whole. And of course, I'm sure it is whole, but we don't want any holes in the whole, do we? Yeah. So Aquarius, that's something you might want to do. Just making sure that everything is in order, that you are properly defended. And today it's true, you may become aware of a new vulnerability, that this vulnerability may actually be sort of an emotional vulnerability. It may just be a point of oversensitivity, and you're perhaps starting to become aware of it. I mean, it's not going to last forever. It's probably just, today, maybe tomorrow. Perhaps you felt it a bit yesterday. You're aware of this vulnerability, but again, it goes back to this reconfiguring, and it's perhaps gives you the impetus to reconfigure your defenses. And it shouldn't take long. And I think once you really start to understand Pluto in Aquarius, I think it will be a big plus in your life. Pisces, you may feel that some things need to be sort of brought down to earth. Things just got a little bit difficult. I mean, they've been fun, but maybe it's just a question of having too much of a good thing. And things may be just a little bit complicated, and where they weren't complicated at all. They didn't start off complicated, but they became complicated. And now Pisces, you want to resolve things and make sure that everything really is in order. And putting things in order, I think, is going to be important. And it might be something that you are quite obsessed about, almost uncharacteristically obsessed about it. And maybe the reason it's uncharacteristic is because Pluto has just gone into Aquarius. I mean, yesterday Pluto was not in Aquarius. Now Pluto is in Aquarius, and the moon is just going into Leo. So the moon in Leo is making an opposition to Pluto, and so that moon-Pluto opposition, which will happen over the course of the day, earlier in America, later in Australia, that moon opposition Pluto is going to encourage you to think about what is making life chaotic. You're aware of it. You may even be a little bit obsessed about it. And so creating a sense of order may actually be really important today. And so put your energy into that. Don't blame anyone. It's not a time for blame, but you want everything in place, and you want to sort of focus on making things simple, and complications, if at all possible, should be avoided. Yet, in terms of other people, you come over as actually being quite a sort of exciting person. You do have a certain dynamism to you, and I think that your presence is going to be appreciated, but you don't want to overdo your presence. You can make yourself available to some extent, but if you spend all your day doing what other people want you to do, if you spend all your day with other people socializing, I think you're going to feel that it's going to make a bad situation even worse. You do have to have a sense in the end of your own boundaries, and I think that's more as the day progresses. I mean, maybe you can start the day being available, being quite sort of light-hearted, not asking deep questions, going with the flow. But as the day progresses, I think things will start to become more serious, and perhaps this is a time when you need to sort of start to slowly sort of withdraw and start to think about your own needs, because I think your own needs are important, and you've got to make sure that everything really is in order. And I think that is something you really can do. And maybe also, Pisces, you're preparing for a sign change. The Sun is about to move into Sagittarius, and tomorrow or the day after, Sun leaves Scorpio and moves into Sagittarius. And obviously I'll be talking about that over the next couple of days. But Sun in Sagittarius, from a Pisces perspective, I think that's quite an important sign change, and it perhaps reminds you of what needs to be done, and I think it could focus on your plans for the future, what you want to achieve. And so maybe by organizing things now, you are preparing for the Sun moving into Sagittarius. You're preparing for a time when you need to be very proactive. You need to be very clear about what you want and what you don't want. And so that's perhaps a note for the immediate future. And that's it for the 12 signs. Before I look at the I Ching, there is one thing I did forget, and I forgot to look at the day from the perspective of Australia and New Zealand. So let me go right back to the beginning of this video. So at the beginning of the video, I showed you the positions of the planets set for London. I mean, this is like this chart, but of course I'm going to set this. I'm going to just put Aries on the left, as I always do. So that's, sorry, not London, New York rather. So positions for New York. Remember the moon at noon, New York. The moon was at 1 degree 43 Leo. But from a perspective of Sydney, Australia, the moon is at noon today is at 22 Cancer. And so this just reminds us that when it comes to the moon, time zone can be important. And so the way you experience today, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, is probably going to be different than say if you're in New York or the eastern time zone of the US. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's very much a moon in Cancer day, and all that stuff about moon conjunct Mars, moon opposition Pluto. In a way, that's more sort of late this evening, maybe more tomorrow. But from your perspective, so I suppose this section of a video is just really focusing on things from a sort of East Asia, Australia, New Zealand point of view. We have a grand trine. The moon is making a trine to Neptune. The moon is making a trine to the Sun. So that's what the day is about. So it's not about moon conjunct Mars. Again, if you're in Australasia, it's really about that grand trine in water. And the moon in Cancer, Neptune in Pisces, Sun in Scorpio. There's just a nice emotional flow there. okay, you can have too much of a good thing. Just too much emotion flowing around is never too fortunate, and just things might just become a little too easy. But on the plus side, there is a high degree of sensitivity, and that sensitivity, emotional sensitivity, does seem to get stronger as the day continues. By sort of noon, if you look sort of noon Sydney, Australia, the moon is at 22 Cancer. I mean, it's still 3 or 4 degrees from the Sun-Neptune trine. So perhaps you should choose activities which make the most of that grand trine in water. While it's still around. The Sun is about to move into Scorpio, move into Sagittarius. So it might be a good idea to do things of an artistic or imaginative nature, or perhaps tune into your spirituality, do some meditation, understand your feelings, give your feelings plenty of room, and maybe don't do anything too material, too concrete, too limiting. Then I think it does need to be a bit of a free flow today, if you are in Australia and New Zealand. Anyway, I'm sorry I missed that. I should have mentioned that earlier in the video. And so let me now turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 12, standstill. It doesn't look great, at least on the surface, because standstill represents a situation where nothing is happening. Or worse, standstill can be about heaven shutting the trap door. So you get this image, perhaps, of a sort of a loft, and a ladder going up to the loft, and there's a trap door. And I suppose you can see the loft as being heaven, and we're down here on earth, and the forces of disintegration and perhaps evil are getting stronger and stronger with standstill. There you can see the bottom 3 lines, broken lines, and so heaven needs to shut us out because it doesn't want to be contaminated by what's going on down here on earth. And so we feel trapped, we feel nothing can happen, and it seems that everything is a waste of time, and nothing is moving. At least that's what the hexagram looks like on the surface, just in isolation. But we do have one moving line, and it is the 5th line that moves. And the 5th line in a hexagram tends to be the most fortunate, and this is true with standstill. So the 5th line of standstill moving is indicative of a change. So we may feel that we're moving from a stage of stagnation where things weren't moving, and now things finally are happening, but we're still quite nervous about it. We're wondering, what if something goes wrong? We've seen perhaps things go wrong in the past, and we're afraid that the past is going to repeat itself in the future. But it's good. It's good to have these doubts, because, we understand that things are difficult, but our doubts are making it, in a way, less likely that we make mistakes. Although we can't be completely paralyzed by our doubts. I mean, while it's healthy to have doubts, we don't want to have too many doubts. And perhaps at some stage we can slowly move forward. And I think we can slowly move forward. And so this situation of standstill is actually coming to an end. But we don't have to force things. And it may be that to an extent we can wait because things are getting better. So we don't have to immediately take the initiative. We can perhaps wait for an invitation. We can't, although again, we can't wait forever for an invitation, but again, things are moving. And so this hexagram standstill does transition to hexagram number 35, which, as you can see, is progress. Things really are moving. The I Ching talks about, I think, the prince getting an audience 3 times. So if you have been trying to get in touch with someone for whatever reason, and it's just you've hit a brick wall, progress indicates that you might get what you're looking for. There might be an invitation. It's just going to be easier to get what you want. So overall today, it might feel that to begin with that actually nothing is happening, that there's no point. Heaven has slammed the trapdoor shut. You can't get up there. You can't get up to a higher level, and you're stuck. But don't despair. Things are moving. The time of standstill is actually coming to an end, and things are moving. And so, because things are moving, we can be optimistic, and in fact, there's a slight danger of over pessimism, thinking, oh, we're stuck. There's nothing we can do. What if it went wrong? But slowly but surely, we are going to transition from a situation of standstill to one of progress. And now I have to consider Joe Biden, who has his birthday today, his 82nd birthday. So I must emphasize that I do wish him a happy birthday. I hope he does something nice. I hope he has an ice cream, whatever he likes to do on his birthday. But still, it is dangerous, isn't it? Because, we have 2 months left of the Biden regime, and obviously they're not happy about losing. And, no one's happy about losing, but the sense of a big change is like even stronger now because Trump is going to take over on January the 20th. So they have the ability now to really mess things up for the Trump regime and to try their hardest to get through what they wanted to do, and with particular reference to Ukraine, and to make things as difficult as possible for Trump as he tries to, I suppose, sort things out from a sort of international and geopolitical point of view. And in particular, the Democrats are obsessed by Ukraine, and they want to make things as complicated as possible by permitting Ukraine to use long-range weapons. Ukrainians apparently have already used long-range weapons. They claim they hit an arms depot. It looks as if the Russians have denied it. I don't. Who knows who to believe? Okay, one shouldn't get too obsessed about these threats. Most of these attackums, I think the Ukrainians today or last night sent 6 attackums, and I think 5 of them got shot down. So it's not. So just because Russia has. So just because Ukraine has been allowed to send these weapons to fire these weapons deep into Russia doesn't mean they're going to reach their targets. But still, it is dangerous, and I think that we need to look at Biden's chart, and just to remind ourselves of the potential of Biden's chart. So here is Biden's chart, born November the 20th, 1942, and. The worrying thing about Biden's chart, and remember, he's still president, got 2 months left of the man, so we've got Uranus on the descendant, and that Uranus on the descendant is just worrying. Uranus is about attacks from the outside. It can be about war, and Uranus is in Gemini. And just a reminder of how it reflects the American chart, the 1776 chart, that the United States has Uranus on the descendant itself, and when Uranus goes into Gemini, the United States tends to go into war. Uranus was in Gemini in 1776. It was in Gemini during the Civil War. It was in Gemini during the Second World War, and it will go into Gemini, I think, in 2026. So there is that potential in the US, and Biden does reflect that, and so one does need to be worried about the potential of Uranus conjunct the descendant in terms of causing a war. I mean, he's already got involved in this war in Ukraine, but sort of talking about some global conflagration. You have a concept of perhaps a nuclear war. 2 months left. A lot can happen in 2 months. I know that there'll be some people watching this who are very sympathetic to Ukraine, who think, oh, well, Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine needs to defend itself. I don't want to go into the issues there. It's a lot more complicated than that. But we're talking about the threat of a nuclear war. It's all very well having principles, but when we're considering the possibility of a nuclear war, when you could say Russia shouldn't have red lines, Russia shouldn't invade Ukraine, but it doesn't matter. Russia has those red lines. They're a reality. And when those red lines get crossed, the nuclear tension pressure goes up. I'm in Lakewood, Washington. Lakewood just destroyed their library, by the way. They had a library. It was a very nice library, but the library system destroyed it. And the good thing about that library is it had a nuclear shelter. So there used to be a nuclear shelter in this. It wouldn't have fitted everyone in Lakewood, but it was there. But they've destroyed the library, so we don't have a nuclear shelter anymore. So that's all the more reason to be afraid of a nuclear war. Now, I mean, I don't think there will be a nuclear war, and I'm hoping that what I'm saying will never come to pass. I mean, I'm not predicting a nuclear war, of course, but I'm just saying there's an increased level of tension. And Biden, of course, is a Scorpio. He's got four planets in Scorpio. He's got Mars in Scorpio, Mars in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, Sun in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, and we just shouldn't forget. Aleister Crowley's view of the Scorpio. I think he talks about this in the Book of Thoth, his handbook on the tarot. And when he says there are three aspects to the Scorpio, there is the highest level, which is the eagle soaring above everything. The intermediate level, which is a snake, which is hiding under a rock, and then there's this lowest level, the scorpion. Stings itself to death, takes everyone down with it, potentially, I suppose. I mean, I don't think scorpions really sting themselves to death when they're surrounded by a ring of petrol. I mean, maybe that's a myth. But there is that sort of self-destruction potentially in a Scorpio. Now, you might be saying, oh, but Joe Biden, he's not there. He's not really in control. What's the point in talking about Joe Biden's chart? He is the American head of state. Doesn't matter how much control he has. He is the king. The king is the land is the king, and he's the king. Doesn't matter how incompetent he is. It doesn't matter what his cognition is like. Until January the 20th, he is the head of state, and his chart is important, and it is a reflection of the United States. So this concept of stinging himself to death, or stinging people to death as an act of self-destruction, I think we might have already seen it in his response to being unseated as the Democrat nominee. I mean, what did he do? He insisted that Kamala Harris replace him as the nominee by endorsing her very quickly. And it almost seems at that Scorpio unconscious level, he knew that she wasn't up for the job. He knew she was going to mess it up for the Democrats, that she knew she was going to be a hopeless candidate, at least on an unconscious level. And then during a campaign, he didn't help. Remember, how did it go? Kamala Harris, she started criticizing Ron DeSantis for his treatment, for his behavior, for how he handled the storm damage in Florida. I don't know whether she was right or wrong to criticize him, but Joe Biden, mentioned that but said pretty soon after that Ron DeSantis was doing a good job. So he contradicted Harris, and he said things to to undermine Kamala Harris, because at some level he didn't want her to win, and I think, and it was noticed that in his press conference after, I think it was a press conference after she lost, people were noticing how happy he seemed. So that could be Scorpio, how Scorpio works. And then he's the president, the dying months of this regime, Scorpio can cause as much trouble as possible for Trump, for the new regime, even if it's something that is completely destructive. A lot of people are critical of this decision to allow the Ukraine to use long-range weapons against Russia, because it's just going to stir things up. Remember, those long-range weapons, they can't actually work. They can't reach their targets unless American or maybe French or British technicians are programming them. So that is actually an act of war. It really is. And it, of course, needs satellite data from the West. Doesn't matter what you think about Ukraine. It's what's happening, and I think it's bringing us closer to the possibility of nuclear war. And so with Joe Biden, there are a few things to be concerned about, like right now. I mean, we've got Mars. I mean, it's not just the fact that he's got Saturn conjunct Uranus. He's got Mars. There is his moon at 0 degrees Taurus. There is his Mars at 12 degrees Scorpio. Mars is slowly moving towards a conjunction of Pluto. You can see Mars is moving towards a conjunction of Pluto. I'll be talking about Mars in more detail in a moment, but Mars goes stationary at 6 degrees 10 minutes Leo on December the 6th. That's the day before December the 7th, which is coincidentally Pearl Harbor Day. So Mars is moving towards Pluto, and in other words, it's going to be square the Sun-Mars midpoint. And so, okay, that might be about him, but it's about him as head of state and what he is doing. Now, his chart, we can relocate his chart. We can relocate his chart to maybe we can relocate his chart to Moscow. So let's relocation. Let's relocate Biden's chart to Moscow. And so if we relocate Biden's chart to Moscow, we can see that Mars is on the descendant. So Mars is at 12 degrees Scorpio. His ascendant is 8 degrees Taurus. So this might, of course, just be telling us stuff we already know. Here is a president who has Mars close to his descendant set for Moscow, and so using astrocartography, we would then say that Russia, because Moscow is the capital of Russia, Moscow and Russia are going to be places of conflict for him. So it's kind of not surprising that he's been drawn into a conflict there, and it's not surprising that he's so obsessed about it. I mean, look at his Pluto. If you set Biden's chart for Moscow, of course we don't know exactly what his time of birth is, but 8:30 a.m. That's rather a round number. Could have been before, could have been earlier. But set for Moscow, Biden has Pluto square the ascendant, and we've got Mars moving towards that conjunction with Pluto, moving towards the square of his Moscow ascendant. It doesn't actually get all the way there, fortunately, perhaps, that it goes stationary direct at 6:10 Leo. And when you're talking about Biden, of course, you're talking about his presidency. And so it might then be worth looking at the inauguration chart, so when Biden became president. And so the question is, has the potential of the inauguration chart been fulfilled already? Or in this last 2 months of the presidency, is something still going to happen? So here is the chart for when Biden became president. And looked at this chart in the past, and I think that this is a really horrible chart, particularly because of this Mars conjunct Uranus, an exact Mars conjunct Uranus when he became president. Mars at 6 degrees 40 Taurus, Uranus at 6 degrees 44 Taurus. Mars conjunct Uranus is about war, it's about things happening that you weren't expecting, and this Mars-Uranus conjunction is square Jupiter, it's square Saturn, it's sort of widely square the Sun. I mean, the Sun is always at always at 0 degrees Aquarius when presidents get inaugurated, by the way. And so that Mars-Uranus conjunction does represent war, does represent destruction. It is dangerous. So I suppose you could say it just indicates the fact that there was that sort of coup, kind of, when he was deposed as a Democrat nominee, effectively. You could say that's Mars-Uranus, and that the Mars-Uranus conjunction has already fulfilled its potential, also with the war in Ukraine. But it's still there. And that chart is going to be in force until January the 20th. And so, think about Mars going stationary direct. Here is a chart for Mars going retrograde. So Mars goes retrograde at December the 6th, 2024. So Mars goes retrograde 6 degrees 2024. So there's Mars at 6 degrees 10 Leo. So if we just contrast the inauguration, there's the inauguration chart in a wheel. Mars going retrograde on the outer wheel. So Mars goes retrograde at 6 degrees 10 Leo. And so there is the inauguration Mars-Uranus conjunction. So Mars goes retrograde within 30 arc minutes of the inauguration Mars. And so I'm thinking that possibly the point of maximum danger is going to be sort of early December, around the 6th of December. And you never know. Pearl Harbor may resonate. That date, December the 7th, the day of infamy, just may resonate. I mean, what's Russia going to do? If Russia gets... If there is a serious strike on Russia, which causes a lot of damage, they are going to retaliate. How are they going to retaliate? I mean, that is a question. They're almost certainly going to retaliate against American assets. They may not do it directly. They may not do it themselves. They may give weaponry to someone else. But it could be that the United States has to look at its own vulnerabilities. And of course, maybe Biden doesn't care with that self-destructiveness of his Scorpio. He just wants to create a mess for Trump when Trump becomes president on November the 20th. So that's certainly something to worry about. And in terms of this Mars retrograde, it's of course Mars goes retrograde. As Mars goes forward, Mars is already made the opposition to the regime's Saturn, and it made, of course, at the time of the election when Mars was at 0 degrees Leo, it was of course hitting the regime's Sun. I mean, the Sun is always at 0 degrees Aquarius, but that was particularly powerful. And then we have to consider the United States. So here is the United States' chart. And so if we look at this United States' chart, we see that the United States has its north node at 6 degrees 36 Leo, and I'm certainly not the first astrologer to notice that Mars is going to conjunct the United States' north node. I mean, other astrologers have noticed it, and so if we do the contrast, USA with Mars retro. So there it is. So Mars going stationary retrograde at 6:10 Leo is right on the United States' North Node. And the North Node is about connections, it's about contacts, and it's presumably to do with foreign relations, and so Mars conjunct the North Node, that suggests that from a geopolitical point of view, things are stirring up, right as we thought that this presidency is over. So I think that there is overall here, I'm showing that there is sort of serious cause to concern. Mercury, look at Mercury. Mercury is going retrograde, is crossing the United States' ascendant. This Mercury-Jupiter opposition is starting to move onto the United States' ascendant. That Jupiter is certainly starting to be something to worry about. That Jupiter, and Jupiter goes stationary direct at the end of the year. I think it goes it's starting. In fact, Jupiter in January, before the inauguration. I think it's January 20. When is that? 21. If we take that 12/21, that would be about the 9th of January. Jupiter is crossing the United States' descendant. I mean, I know Jupiter, it's a nice planet, isn't it? But no, not really. Not when it's in Gemini. It may be a neutral reception to Mercury, but the thing is, you've got Mercury and Jupiter making that opposition at the beginning of next year on the United States' ascendant, and it is a very warlike thing. And so, that's just more cause for concern. And so I just think that these last 2 months of Biden's administration are just really, really dangerous. And I think I sort of demonstrated this astrologically. And it all ties in with his support for, or his giving Ukraine permission to use long-range weapons against Russia. Now, this means that, I'm not a supporter of Trump. There's so much about Trump that I disagree with, particularly, Trump's treatment of the environment. He just has, complete and utter contempt for the environment. But given what is happening, and I hope I don't lose any subscribers for saying this, but maybe I will, but given what Biden is doing, and he's trying to stir things up for Trump, I'm kind of thinking, well, Trump can't become president fast enough. I will be so relieved when Trump becomes president on January the 20th. And, to get to January the 20th without sort of some wider confrontation, if we can just get to January the 20th, get Trump into the White House, then we can worry about other things. But I think that the Biden as president, it can't end fast enough. It really can't. So, sorry to end with that, but I do find this whole thing very, very worrying, and we shouldn't think that the Biden presidency is over. We've got 2 months of it left, and I'm just quite afraid of those last 2 months. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this video of some interest. Sorry to sound a little bit partial. It is not that I'm a supporter of Trump. It's just that I find the Biden regime, at least from a geopolitical perspective, really, really disturbing. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.